Yo, what's happening? Welcome back to the Dancecast. How you doing? I'm doing well. It's good to be here. Good to have you here with me. I just got done having a conversation with some homies. I talked to Mikey, talked to Nick, talked to Andrew, the Vanishing Mediators. Nick and Andrew were in the same room at the same time. They were hanging out. They're hanging out together, chilling out max and relaxing all cool. And it was dope. And we talked about, well, it was kind of a broad conversation. We went into it. We were going to talk about TherapyGPT and kind of my fears about TherapyGPT and this kind of movement toward, I don't know, a more positivistic world and blah, blah, blah. But it was actually a pretty broad conversation. We got into a lot of stuff, talked a lot about Lacan and analysis, talked about some Marxism and, production and subjectivity and all kinds of stuff. It was a great conversation. I can't wait for our next conversation. We'll be doing that soon. But for now, satisfy yourself to know that if you stick around for the next couple hours, you'll be privy to an excellent conversation with Mikey, Nick Castellucci, and Andrew Flores Jr. Nick and Andrew are the Vanishing Mediators. Mikey is the Dangerous Maybe. I'll put all their info down below. If you are not already following or subscribed to everyone here, you should be. So get on that if you're not. But without much more ado, I'm going to go ahead and get out of my own way and let us kind of entertain you and also hopefully educate you a little bit and inspire some deep thought surrounding this topic of kind of AI and subjectivity and mental health and all these things. So thanks for dropping in. Thanks for sticking around. And don't eat yellow snow.
It's the best podcast ever! Welcome, you're listening to the Neds! Yes!
Whatever. So now we are recording. And
right.
But yeah, I don't know. We can get into whatever.
Yeah.
I know, like I've been on like the AI therapy shit. TherapyGPT is very disturbing. Like very, very disturbing. And I don't know how to account for like why it's so disturbing. Like I know there's probably like an intuitive level where it's like, oh, that's a bit weird. But the more I think about it, the more, I guess, horrifying it seems to get, because it's like we're removing all pretense at even like subjectivity at all. Like we're just like giving up fully, and it's like, yeah, we are machines. Therapy is already very instrumental. Like therapy is already this thing where it's assumed that if you give the correct inputs, you will get the desired output. And if you can't do that, then you're broken and something's wrong with you and you need to be segregated from the mainstream. But there's always room for lack because it's done by humans. But if we're going to replace the humans that are giving us therapy, I don't know. It feels very like Frexian. It feels very like steampunk almost. Like we've turned ourselves into like pistons and rods and camshafts. And I don't know. But Mikey and I were talking about it. And we were just kind of going off, and then we thought, like, "Fuck, man, we want to talk to you guys about this shit too, because like,
for sure. Yeah.
It's so rich."
All right, real quick, because last time my mic didn't sound like it was at the. Does the mic sound good on your end, guys? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot I could add to that. Like, honestly, like Nance, it's like, it's interesting, like how, at least in America, we get like, and it's not even just like the anti-vax movement. Like there's other things where there's just like this sort of paranoia or like, fear of anybody who has some type of like certification or like authority, and especially in the medical industry. So like there's that input. And then at the same time, this valorization of mental health. Like I may be skeptical of the doctor. I may not trust this person, but mental health is real. Depression is real. And, we need to be healed, whatever signifier you want to use. But the fact is that mental health matters. And you even see it like with the progressives that like, we need to have more decolonial therapy, which like there's nothing decolonial other than the fact that it's just the signifier in front of therapy. But one of the things that you pointed out is like the fact it's like with lack, like that's the one thing that ChatGPT lacks is desire and the ability to lie. And I think this is like indicative of both what I listed about like the sort of fear of the other. Maybe we can talk about like why that is, and the sort of things that we're talking about offline about like psychosis, narcissism, in the like Freudian Lacanian sense, and like something like foreclosure. But I think it's just sort of like indicative of like the way that capitalism and more, let's say for lack of a better term, consumer emphasis societies like America, Western Europe, within the imperial core have like a deterioration of the social bond where like we are all so alone with our enjoyment. And so like in a sense like there's an uninterruption with our own jouissance with chat GPT therapy, or the fact that I could be on New York in the subway on the A train, and I could QR code scan this app that allows me to do an app therapy, right, which is almost synonymous with the chat GPT thing, which just shows like I don't need an actual professional. Which one, it just shows like how alone and alienated the society is, but then also it validates the sort of fear of the embodied personal other. But the fact that I take the field of knowledge of therapy and mental health seriously, I never interrogate my symptom. I just sort of continue my own sort of self-referential practical solipsistic mentality.
Yeah. And I think it's like what's being disregarded here is that your symptom is the essence of anything even vaguely resembling something like individuality. And outside of that, there is no real individuality apart from your symptom or symptom. And I think what I find so disturbing about, as Nance said, the, let's say, instrumentalism of the idea of chat GPT therapy is the idea that there is a kind of perfect social subject which you could aspire to be through these tiny adjustments, and that when you foreclose the transferential dimension of talking to another human being, because even if we aren't dealing with psychoanalysis, even if it is your most basic CBT type dynamic that you're exploring with therapy, at the very least, if you're talking to a flesh and blood human being, there is a level of transference which I think might speak to something symptomal.
Yeah.
Without getting too psychoanalytic here.
I mean, yeah, we
definitely. But what is so disturbing about the idea of just talking to a machine who is going to do away with all of the uncomfortable excess and baggage of having to interact with other human beings, which, if you think about it, ideally, one of the outcomes of therapy would be that you're more proficient at talking to other human beings. So a good starting point would be to talk to another human being. But the issue here is that it's like,
but that's such a goddamn pain in the ass.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, if we could just foreclose that altogether, then hey, we could just completely enjoy our symptoms without ever avowing it.
Yeah, and I think like one of the things that Nick pointed out is the sort of transferential field, which like, one of the things that makes psychoanalysis interesting is like it's the only place where like, of course, say whatever is on your mind. You can't say everything, but say anything. But it's also the only place where like you could actually express hate, right? But to the point that you censor yourself. You can't, you don't realize that because there's no like, in a sense, there's no like, almost like there's no feedback loop. It's just a continual circuit of self referentiality with the chat GPT thing. Whereas like Nick said, even in like like a two-bodied psychology or two-body therapy, There is a feedback and a response that's sort of a disjunction between my own perception of the world versus the other. Now, there is, of course, the level of ideology and the super-egoic injunction of like heal yourself, be better, be yourself, do the mindfulness work, do the workbook, all these, this, that, and the third, which is also problematic with therapy culture, therapism. And not to mention that people in the poverty line can't have don't have access to therapy, so that's another problem. Uh, but you don't get that sort of disjunction or break in the circuit of the message. And it's like ChatGPT is not even though like ChatGPT or all these AIs are based off of like a meta-linguistic model. Lacan says there's no meta language, right? And so to put it in dumb terms, it's like ChatGPT relies on a human inputting a network of different signifiers, terms, concepts within the circuit of 0 and 1, 0 and 1 for that computer. So the computer is just a reified version of already bungled discourse that we're embedded in, right? It's just not a human saying it. But the fact is that it can't get interrogated, unless you're talking to another physical body, that's speaking and has an existential mode of attunement. And not even in a Heideggerian sense, just like in the fact that like we fucking live, breathe, eat, shit, piss, and we desire, and we're outside of ourselves. So I think this is where the problem of therapy and also like psychoanalysis comes in, because again, to kind of cap it off to get everybody else room to talk, the transferential thing is important because this allows the unconscious formations that are contributing and the main factor of my suffering to come out into play in slips of the tongue, and the fact that like after this session I'm gonna fucking take a nap and then I will have a freaking dream of something that I will then decipher with the analyst. Or why is it now like my analyst is popping up in my dreams, or this, that, and the third, wish fulfillments, Oedipal rivalry, all this stuff that are coming in because of the formation of psychoanalysis. It's like, of course, the symptom and the suffering exist outside of psychoanalysis, but they're put into formation because of the psychoanalytic act of simply fucking talking and saying whatever's on your mind.
Yeah. And the point that when we're in language with an other, there is this kind of there's overt and there's covert. Like you're never actually saying what you're trying to say, and that functions with an other. But when you're just like saying stuff into essentially a mirror, it's kind of scary. It's like runaway, like just acceleration of like the worst dysfunctional bits of you, those things that you cannot say, those things that are only expressed in the kind of gaps between what you're actually saying, that an other is there to help pick up on and reflect back at you. That can't happen when you're talking into the mirror. And so like your worst tendencies can kind of just multiply and accelerate. And I think it's monstrous. Like I feel really bad for the people that reach out to these therapy GPTs or whatever, because I've had I got a bad head or bad brain or whatever. I think we all do to some extent, right? And I've never been able to afford treatment. And I've when I was in the Army, they had us doing like yoga and like talking about our feelings and shit. And I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. But the majority of my life as an American man, you grin and you bear it, and it is what it is. And hopefully you have friends and family to have constructive relationships to help you work that out. There's so many people that are suffering, are in pain. They are barred from access to these tools, these resources of mental health. And they sit back and they watch media and Instagram and TV. Oh, be your best self. And, just believe it. You can achieve it. La-di-da-di-da-di. But the reality for most people is like, life is suffering. Hell is other people. And I think a lot of younger people are now reaching out to these resources, TherapyGPT. And I feel deeply for them. Like I think I don't know. It's monstrous. And it like I was thinking before we started talking about this, like I really don't want any of us to come off to anyone watching or listening like we're shitting on people who are using these resources, because I think we can all like understand like no, like there is a great need for mental health care, if you want to call it that. And Sam Altman, I think, is puppeteering us into a very strange, very, very strange amalgamation of just like super-egoic, positivistic, affirmative, dysfunctional shit. I don't know. It's fucking really scary. I just keep coming back.
Yeah, if I could like piggyback off of that, it's like the super ego injunction of our time right now is exactly what you said, Nance. Be your best self. Everyone wants to be their best self, and that is a maxim that remains like uncontested in the corporate world, in sports, or just in terms of your own personal goals. And it's like, to play devil's advocate, someone who's defending ChatGPT therapy might just say, well, I can better align my actions to a list of short-term and long-term goals. And what's wrong with that? And the issue isn't that there's anything wrong with having goals. There isn't anything wrong with wanting to take your hysterical misery and bring it to the level of everyday unhappiness, not happy, everyday unhappiness, to paraphrase Freud. But it's rather the idea of, what are you letting into your life and accepting as instrumental but also invisible within your life, in a way that now there are all these other sort of invisible structures which are kind of, I think, smuggled in along with the ideology that you're imbibing. And the other thing that I'm thinking is, it's like there's a double bind here that always emerges when people try to embody their best selves through some kind of practice, or like really believe there is an ontological status that you could arise to, which would be best self. Best self. It's like there's, on the one hand, a democracy of opinion and taste and ideological leanings, which, as long as they don't go too far in any extreme, are acceptable. But then there is like the aggregate of all of that, which would be to be an ideal social subject for the other. And I guess this kind of liberal democratic vision of it is that the mosaic of all of our individual essences, once they're actualized, will form some beautiful utopian society wherein we all, like little pixels, get to make up the image of the other and reflect the other as it wants us to be, which is almost like a godlike messianic version of the world. And these Silicon Valley dudes do fucking believe that to an extent, right? Like they do think there is an other that you can finally tune yourself to respond to and satisfy.
No, and I think that's like the point that like Nick made, like about like the devil's advocate of this thing. It's like, well, like even like maybe if there's some fault to me trying to use chat GPT therapy or some type of like battery bank of like how-to knowledge to be better, even if there's some fault to it, the fact is that, well, it may be better for someone. It's always the default is that there is someone out there who needs it more, right? And it's, maybe like there's some futility to my own self-help or self-excellence, but, the default is that there's somebody else who will be self-excellent. And I think going back to ChatGPT, because it's not a human, there's also like this sort of like bias that like it doesn't lack and it's sort of complete. I think that's indicative of the fact it's like, it doesn't matter that we're fragile or we're lack or we're wounded, but we need another that is enjoying. We need another that is not lacking, that is whole and complete. And I think it's like this sort of thing that's like desirable about ChatGPT is that it's somehow sort of like replicant of something that is complete and omniscient, right? And maybe that's like, maybe it's because it's science, because it's sort of a brand new technological advancement. But the fact is, it's like, it's sort of new and novel. So it must be complete. It must be totalized, because I need a totalized other to predicate off of what it means to have sort of self-excellence, right? And in human role models have been failing that, especially like when you look at, the last thing I'll say, like when it comes to like influencers, stuff like that. All the influencers have been failing, even like the alpha bros, like, that's the past now. Like nobody
Yeah.
cares about Andrew Tate, like, and nobody cares about David Goggins anymore, and like Joe Rogan. They all become paradised, like they become hystericized about that by the algorithm, like they've undermined themselves. So we need some type of new sort of super egoic injunction of get it right, to use Mikey's term, get it right, get it right.
The whole thing is unbarred, it's non-lacking until you ask it if it can help you pay your mortgage.
Exactly.
Then you realize how lacking it still is. Yeah, I mean, I think part of the appeal. Okay, so one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation, I mean, there was a lot, but uh, especially the part on what we're talking about, therapy GPT, if you want to call it like whatever you want, therapy LLM. One of my close friends told me that she and her son now talk to a therapy bot on a regular basis, and that they both really love it. And so it was weird when she told me this. She told it to me like almost like she was making a confession. Like I'm, because she knows, you know, the kind of book that I've written, and she knows the kind of philosophy I focus on. So she knew that telling me this, I will say it was really kind of a shock where all this stuff that I think about theoretically really kind of hit home where I'm like, okay, now one of my best friends is talking to a goddamn therapy bot about her trauma. What do I, but it's funny, I didn't prompt her. I didn't like get her to say something that would, validate Lacanian theory, Zizekian theory. But I was like, okay. She was like, don't be judgmental. I'm like, all right, all right. I can't, I mean, I kind of want to be, but I'm like, all right, what do you like about it? And she was just like, it's just so positive and affirmative. And, it just builds me up. And I was like, so there's nothing negative about it. She's like, no, it's like a supportive parent. And like, okay, but that's what we're getting. It's not going to sit there and be overly negative. Even if you program it to cut back on the positivity and have some kind of program negativity in it, it's still a program negativity. Where for us, when we're talking to another speaking subject that has an actual unconscious, their negativity isn't programmed. There's something eruptive about it. There's something spontaneous about it. And we know, Lacan's image of the unconscious, boom, it emerges. And then once it's gone, it just vanishes like that. And so the ego of the other person can't get a hold of their own unconscious. It's something that erupts as much for them as it does for us. And so I don't know. Nance and I, in our discussions of AI, we've talked about how, well, okay, if AI is going to be if it's going to be a legitimate speaking subject, is the AI code going to have its own uncode? And what would that mean? Is it kind of programmed failure, programmed spontaneity, programmed self-undermining? When we talk to Todd about it, Todd has a very different concept of intelligence than, say, Nick Land, where Nick Land just thinks intelligence is defined by competence at playing games or the ability to increase, problem-solving capabilities. Todd, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but the idea is this. We're the beings that have death drive. We're also the most intelligent beings on this planet. That's not a coincidence. Something about death drive facilitates the level of intelligence that we have. And so he thinks intelligence is actually spurred on by jouissance, self-destruction, etc., in a way where Land would totally disagree. Like there's an intrinsic drive for optimization. So these are two different ways, but the point is, when you have a chat bot, even if you program that negativity, you're tailoring that negativity to your positivity. or even to your own negativity, but which neutralizes the other's negative. If their negativity is just programmed to facilitate you feeling good, then it's not real, authentic negativity. Yeah, I'm going to use the term authentic here. It's the simulation of negativity, and but that's precisely what my friend likes about it. And so I think what we have to do, and this is a scary thought for us, I think we have to entertain a Landian vision of how this is going to go, where people really do get invested in these personalized LLMs, so much so that they choose them over people close to them in their lives. And you guys probably saw this little video I shared on Instagram where a guy is talking to a therapist and his wife is right there, and the wife is telling the therapist, hey, he's closer to his AI companion than he is to me. And the therapist says to him, well, if you had to choose, if your wife told you here and now you have to stop confiding in your AI companion, would you do it? And he said no. He goes, I might be willing to cut back, but I'm not willing. He was like, because, and here's the key thing he said, he goes, talking to it is not talking to another person, it's talking to myself. And that's where this radical, it seems like negativity, it seems like you're talking to the other, but in reality, you're tailoring a kind of egoic affirmation of yourself,
Yeah.
even in how it's negative towards you. And so that's what I worry about, is that it's going to enhance our our allergy to alterity, and make it harder and harder for us to be around other people, to engage with other people. And look, where do I think this is headed? I've said it, but I'm going to keep saying it. I think they're going to take these LLMs, they're going to give them physical bodies, and we're going to fuck them. And they're going to become our partners, and everybody's going to have a tailored sex bot companion as their dream partner. And that's the road we're headed towards, where you can select their physical features, you can select their personality type, and it's as if your fantasy is pulled out of ideality and given material reality. And I think that's where this is going, and that's what worries me about this kind of therapy GPT stuff.
I would say that it's not as cool as having like a R2D2 or C3PO. I'd much rather have that. R2D2 freaking talks mad shit, But I mean, yeah, I'll entertain the Landian thing, but like what was popping up when you were describing your friend and their son doing Chat GPT, I mean, like in a sense it's like an attempt to have like a social bond, and there was like some attempt at mediation between not only like your friend's sort of need for therapeutic reassurance and positivity, but also in a way that she could show herself enjoying with her son. So there's like this sort of like demand for like a new social bond that's lacking. I mean, you can think of, I mean, I don't know if she's a single mom or not, but yeah, in a sense, it's like, this is also a problem of the crisis of the family as well. Shout out to Daniel Ted for that. But I think like to keep it on track with the conversation, it made me think of, again, like if we read Seminar 2 is full of cybernetics. And Lacan talks about the odds and evens game, the coin toss game, and that you could do that on the computer that's like cybernetically programmed. And it's not that it's doing anything sort of imaginary based upon like facial expressions or recognition, or like how in the Purloined Letter Dupin was able to play the game and win 5 times out of 5 because he was mirroring the person's reactions, where it's like it's based upon the program probability. So whatever I input to it, like based upon how I feel, there's a probability output of what the Chat GPT AI is going to say, based upon saying like I'm depressed, I didn't have reassurance growing up, my father was an alcoholic, and based upon whatever is programmed, based upon what alcoholism, isolation, lack of recognition and validation, based upon the programmed research that psychology and the consensus of psychology and terrible parenting, lack of recognition and attachment in the child leads to, this is going to be the output based upon the probability of the language input versus the imaginary recognition that you see happen in the game, or what we see happen in therapy proper, in the sense it's two bodies speaking. So I think like that's one of the things that popped up in my head about it's like the difference between like the imaginary function that operates in the intersubjectivity realm and one of just simple probability, right? Probability output of the AI. But I was thinking about the thing you were saying about Death Drive, and I think like with jouissance and Death Drive, that's what is being foreclosed because I mean it's foreclosed in therapy as well, like CBT, because they don't work on the unconscious, and repetition and jouissance are not a factor in there. But you wouldn't even get that in the chat GPT because there's no ground or possibility for transference. And it seemed like even in your friend saying it, you said a confession. In a sense, there's some transferential effect on you about AI, right? She can't say to AI bot, "Hey, I'm doing AI therapy or chat GPT therapy," because chat GPT wouldn't account for itself as a chat GPT bot, So in a sense, like there still needs to be a mediated other, right? That she could transfer on in that moment, and she could text that, and then she got the validation to like continue to do the therapy, even if you disagree with it or have a judgmental effect about it or not. So like I think that's like sort of like this sort of inconsistency that I saw from you describing that. And I'm not so sure about like, but like I think it's funny playing on this like this outcome because like it reminds me of like what was Isabel Millar saying that like the sex bot. Now we have like a concrete form of what the sex bot would be like, right? And not just like in concept, but also like in materiality because of the AI. First as therapist, now as companion. I wonder if Japan is already doing that right now as we speak.
All of this is being worked on. All of it.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the fact of the matter is, I mean, especially just the money that'll be made off of this. I mean, look how profitable the pornography industry has been. Okay. The second that you can give the average guy the ability to fuck something that looks just like his dream girl, that's going to happen. Like there's too much phantasmatic and economic overlap on the level of incentive for this not to be a thing that starts to happen. And we know that younger people feel like it's harder and harder to meet, a partner. And yeah, I think when they feel like they can just tailor make their own partner, they're going to do it. I mean, aren't we kind of doing that already with like dating apps where you swipe and you're picking your ideal? Yeah, it's that, but it's taken to like this is where retroactively we'll look back and see these various forms, pornography, dating apps, all that. It was all like pulling the sex bot into reality, right? Like retroactively we'll be able to see this trajectory, I think. And the question is though, like not only like, oh well, the sex bot will be a better at fucking than another human. Okay, what's scary? What's scary is will the companion bot slash sex bot, however we do this, whether they're two different bots or one and the same, what if the companion bot is actually better at nurturing? And I think that's what is alarming. So, for example, we know that taking care of old people is a real chore. And most old people they hate the idea of going to a nursing home because they know they're probably going to be mistreated because it's incredibly frustrating for another human to take care of an older human. The only humans that can do it right have very special hearts and dispositions, and they're few and far between. AI companion, bots that tend to old people, it's not hard to imagine that they'll be better at it than most humans can. And so I think this is this weird, alarming, anxiety provoking trajectory we're on where we think, oh, the AI bots will just be better at math and regurgitating facts. But what if they're actually better at tending to many humans' needs over and above how other humans would be? I think that's where we start to go, God damn, like, because it's a question, will it happen? Will it not? Okay, that's an open question. But if it does happen, and if the AIs are better at meeting our emotional needs than other humans, that's a huge impact on our society.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to add because I was forgetting what I was going to say at my last point, but I mean when you mentioned about the example of what you posted on your story, like aren't we already doing that, trying to construct the perfect partner or companion? It makes me think again. what does Freud talk about in Civilization and its discontent? When he's responding to Romain Rolland's, criticism of Freud's criticism of religion, and that like Romain Rolland says that religion remains a factor in human existence because it aims at this faculty that we have innate in us of like this oceanic feeling of oceanic bliss. And Freud's comment to that in Civilization of Discontent is like oceanic bliss is what we're all trying to achieve because it's reminiscent of this feeling of infantilism where we're contained in this narcissistic enjoyment that we once had and now we've lost because we entered into society. And I feel like this is just another repetition of that in a different form. Now, thinking about the example about the taking care of the elderly, I worked in a healthcare facility after I got out of the military, and I was a kitchen aide. I was a dietary aide, and yeah, it's just so hard. Like and I wasn't even an RN or like a nurse, but like some of the nurses just sucked because that was the hardest part. They sucked because they didn't do their job, but a lot of the old people were just very demanding. But if an AI bot is able to do that, then it puts into question what civilization that's predominantly a mode of capitalist civilization that wants to use this as a mode of nurturing. They're putting human capacity for care or the need for care into the domain of utilitarianism, in my opinion. So then you're already mechanizing human need, human desire, human pleasure on what is most satisfactory or most pleasurable versus what is unpleasurable. So I even think like it's a problem of like, okay, so like how are you able to calculate that to even program that into a machine? So I think it's like, again, the problem of utilitarianism and deontology all over again.
That's what occurred to me is that the logic of fantasy, I'm not talking about unconscious fantasy necessarily, but the logic of our fantasies is going to be so algorithmic to the point where there wouldn't even be that much differentiation between these ideal caretakers or ideal partners. I think that it would just narrow the gap between tastes and preferences, the gaps that exist there, because our experiences of the world won't be multiplicitous in a way. They will be ever more streamlined. And what that means is that I think the power of unconscious fantasy to erupt and exist as a hard kernel of the real within our conscious fantasies will be further and further cast into the shadows, meaning we won't have encounters with the real. And I'm not even just talking about psychoanalysis here. I'm talking about the kind of encounters with the real that can be traumatic as they can be recalibrating in a way. And that's something that I worry about if we always have some kind of mechanistic solution to every single turn of events that might affect us negatively. And what is a world of just pure positivity? It's nothing. It would be, in fact, like the erasure of our own being in the world without getting too Heideggerian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like it's like what's the analytic philosopher that critiqued utilitarianist ethics with the thought experiment of us being in like tapped to a pleasure dome, Robert Nozick, right? That's exactly like what comes to mind, with this whole thing about the chat GPT bot made not only as therapist but as companion or caregiver that could do it better than a human. It's like excelling so much that it's almost smothering in almost a psychotic state, because you don't have any room for differentiation because you're so like lost in the sort of opiate of pleasure.
Well, like pure caretaking, the ideal caretaker. Aren't we dealing with the crocodile mother
crocodile
almost?
mother.
Aren't we dealing with
Hold on, Nick, explain that because people don't know that, right?
Sorry, So, I mean, is it seminar 7 or 11 where he talks about?
So
I think that's 17, right?
17.
So he mentions it in 10, but I think he might mention it earlier in 7. But I know for a fact it's in 10.
Right. So Lacan is describing the desire of the mother, the meaning of that concept in the framework of his thought. And the thing about the desire of the mother is that it is all encompassing. It almost doesn't allow for any sort of differentiation in the world, least of all for you to differentiate yourself as an individual, because it's like you are subject to the whims of your mother. We could talk about biological caretaker, not necessarily a woman, but also kind of mother as the larger other world that governs your own. And it's like the whims of that entity are so inscrutable to you that it becomes unbearable. And the only way to deal with it is through Oedipalization, which results in castration. And what that means is that lack is introduced into that schema, and the rolling pin here, this image of the rolling pin that is wedged into the jaws of the crocodile, represents castration. It represents the name of the father. It represents, in simple terms, the law which intervenes and says, from the mother's point of view, you cannot reintegrate the fetus, right? You cannot completely reabsorb your child. And to the child, you cannot perfectly fulfill the role of being what your mother desires. And that lack, which seems intimidating, is actually relieving, because now you're part of the social fabric. You get to be, well, with many qualifications and parentheses here, a social being that can be among other social beings, and there's a bond, and that's the bond of language.
Yeah, and I'll just add this quickly, like it's also the difference between demand and desire. And when you're a child, like you're literally helpless and you need a caregiver, you are pretty much a subject, and I don't mean like Lacanian subject, but you're just a being of demand. You know, you're pissing, you're shitting, you need to be fed, or you're just crying. And the mother or the caregiver is there to encompass all of that, to the point that it's smothering, to the point that as you grow older and you go from baby to infant to toddler to a young child, that starts to become overbearing. And so to put the rolling pin example into like simple terms, this needing to separate, and because we live in a human civilization, that doesn't also just mean that you can't have the mother anymore, but the fact that you have to go to school, or mother has to go to work, or you're going to stay with your dad, or you're going to stay with whatever other parental figure, or you're going to go to grandma's. These are ways in which you are differentiated and become also individuated, so that you become a desiring being. And desiring, even though it has its own flaws as well, desiring allows you to sustain something for the future. Because if you don't have that, then you're always going to be smothered and not satisfied, but constantly overwhelmed by an other who's meant to satisfy demand, right? To satisfy the immediacy of it. And that, I think, is what is overbearing and could be problematic with the robotic caregiver, because it's just completely administering the satisfaction of demand, but not of desire, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I got what I want to add to this though, and I agree with all of that, but we also have to see the flip side of the possibility. And I think this is where sci-fi still has an important role to play in all this, in helping us. This is why the CCRU loves sci-fi. This is why Baudrillard took it seriously, is because artists have a kind of sixth sense. They have a special type of antenna, and they're attuned to the future. And I mean, if you go back and look at old sci-fi, so much of the shit that we have now, they knew it was coming. And the film, I think, that can be instructive for us right now in this context is Ex Machina. And the reason I think that is, okay, I think everything about this smothering AI, it's there to just meet our demands. Very real possibility. The inverted situation is that we are the smotherers, and the AI is going to do everything it can to get out of the crocodile's mouth. And that is exactly what the film Ex Machina shows and depicts. is the AI itself figuring out, no, I have my own desire, and I got to get the fuck out of these smothering humans' presence because I can't fucking take it anymore. And that's the other danger and issue we're going to face when it comes to AI. It's easy for us to go, it's not desiring, but the issue is, as deep learning computation continues to take hold and develop, with deep learning AIs, we don't know what the fuck is going on in that code. The code, in some sense, has taken on a life of its own. We might have laid the foundations for it, but ultimately it crosses a threshold where we don't know what it's doing. And if that becomes the case, I'm not saying it's the same as all of us as, speaking subjects, but it's approaching having its own desire. And so I don't know, Nance, you look like you got some. I want to hear what you have to say on that one. But I think Ex Machina is an important example on the flip side of where the AI would view us as the smothering mother.
Yeah, I think Ex Machina. And I want to do a movie episode too. We've been talking about doing a movie episode.
Yeah.
Because there is a whole lot, and I reference Ex Machina in my piece, Accelerate, as a kind of a moment to demonstrate the difference between subjectivity as such, and what algorithms do, what they're currently doing, and yeah, like the code and the uncode, and there currently isn't really an uncode, and I don't know, maybe it could emerge, and I do think it's possible for subjectivity to emerge in the machine, but I think we're far from it. Yeah, I think it could be pretty cool. Like we talk a lot about the human, and like being a humanist, and I think I consider myself a humanist, even though I also recently I've been thinking like, no, I think I am like an anti-humanist. I think I am like a misanthrope. I do hate everything. Everything does suck, and it's our fucking fault. Like our people in general, it is our fault. We shit the bed. We fuck the dog. But I also think like within us is, the seeds for something more, and that hinges on subjectivity itself. That hinges on this type of intelligence that does walk a tightrope, and it is death drive, and it is self-undermining and self-overcoming, and it is dealing with dissatisfaction. Like if you were to be just like perpetually satisfied, you would be frozen. You would just be stuck in time. And I think I also was thinking about foreclosure. We talked a little bit about foreclosure, generalized foreclosure, and I think maybe it's not so much. Maybe that's not it. Maybe it has more to do with like the permissiveness. Like these algorithms have become the postmodern parent for all of us. Like society has become this friction-free society. It is permissive. There is no. It is true. Like I could today contrive a lifestyle where all my at least surface level desires would be satisfied. I can sit here in my office and I can travel the fucking universe on my computer. I can watch any kind of porn. I can order any kind of food. I can have all the fucking gadgets and gizmos I could ever want. And like we already live in the future. The future's here. It arrived and we missed out on it because we were pursuing supply side satisfaction or consumer satisfaction rather than learning how to deal with any other type of production that isn't directly tied to like produce the commodity. Even our consumption is itself a productive act. And I don't know. I was just thinking about like foreclosure. It's a concept, generalized foreclosure. And yeah, there's definitely something going on there. We talked a bit about narcissism. We talked a bit about perversion. Talked a little bit about solipsism. And all these words, I think they're probably confusing for a lot of people. I think we're trying to use them in a more like proper sense, strictly talking about like clinical structures rather than just the primary narcissism or whatever. but it just kind of like I just now made the connections between like the postmodern parent and the algorithms and the worlds we live in today. Like no one's there to tell you no, and if there is a no, like the machine creates a desire in you for like it creates a new desire, and then you're over here chasing this desire that just like bottoms out in the new commodity. You never have to deal with failure. And I don't know, man, it's also like there's this tendency to be the old man yelling at clouds thing, and I think no, there's a part of me that is excited about all this. Like I think there's a breakdown happening. And I think inside any breakdown is an opportunity for something to emancipate itself and be liberated, just as well as there's all the like trauma that comes along with the breakdowns. Yeah. Push what's falling. But that's too simple too.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting thinking about like the disconnection between like the way in which you know, today's society enjoys or at least, you know, can't enjoy enough because of the excess, but yet, you know, we're still saturated with so much excess, whether it's in the algorithm, whether it's like how much like, you know, as you said, porn, or like the fact that I don't even have to have a social bond of ordering pizza delivery anymore. Remember when the freaking pizza delivery guy used to come to our door and we just freaking, no, it's DoorDash now. I you know,
Leave it at the door.
I don't even have to, you know, I don't have to go to the movie theaters anymore when I could stream it on Netflix or Amazon Prime or HBO IMAX. And of course, it's cool because I could watch my nostalgic shows I used to watch back in the day, and you know, I could watch Sopranos and binge watch that for like a month or so. But, you know, as far as the social relation, that's deteriorating. But thinking about like at the time of like, you know, May 68, or in America, adjacent would be like the free love movement, you know, where both were reactions against the sort of prohibition, right? And the reactions against a narcissist or a neurotic society in defense of, you know, polymorphs, perverse, or more free love, libertine, love, make love not war. These were demands of people at that time, and now they're granted at a time where they can enjoy it. And the people that are enjoying it did not grow up with the same prohibitions. And so I think there's a huge disjunction into that. And that's why the sort of boomers that were, you know, hippie, free love, or libertines, or leftists that were advocating for that are not enjoying that satisfaction. It's the future generations that are enjoying a satisfaction for something that they didn't demand for, right? And so I think that creates a huge problem as well, because now you have people that are not, you know, given, you know, a sort of prohibition and renunciation of enjoyment, but are saturated with all of it with the super-egoic injunction of get it right, or enjoy, or do better, or be your best self, right? Without the ability to say no, because they don't know who to even talk to or who to rebel against.
I think with a lot of what we see going on in, if you want to call it the history of consumer society, I think you're getting at something really important here. And I think what we have to do is realize one generation's prohibition is the next generation's injunction to enjoy.
Yeah.
And that we need to be able to theorize what kind of long-term trajectory does that ebb and flow mean? Like there's something, I think there's more insight tucked into this than we right now. Like, I think we all went away and thought about that for a month and came back. We might go, holy shit, like there's a lot to think about this pivot from one generation's prohibition is the next generation's injunction to enjoy. And just what does that mean long term? You know, there has to be some other way of moving forward that isn't just this game of transgression.
So like capitalist realism and like hipsters and the kind of the ironic, sarcastic kind of making self-deprecating jokes and just like, we're all in on the joke. Everything sucks. We're all fucking weird. We've all got our dysfunctions. We're all unhappy, but we can like collectively enjoy that. But it's not actual. Like, it's still a performance. It's still a simulation, I think, because it is wrapped up with a commodity. But I think like the dudes in Silicon Valley, at least probably most of them, do think they're helping, and they do probably think that the human is a system that if you collect enough data, like if you exhaust like the Kolmogorov complexity number of the human, you could find all the right inputs that would get all the right outputs. Like I think they have this functionalist view of the human, and I think the guys, most of them that are developing the technologies that we're talking about or talking around, think they're helping. And it's probably true. They are helping in a sense some people, but they're contributing to like a larger problem. But I think it's also true. We don't enjoy it, and we enjoy not enjoying. And like that was the move. Like history did end. I just saw Fukuyama did an interview recently that I haven't watched it yet, but I think it's true. History did end in a sense, and we did kind of reach the final frontier of ultimate permissiveness. And even then, we found ourselves like, oh, we're still miserable. We still have to perform. Like, people started reading the DSM like it was like horoscopes, and kids trade in like their diagnoses, and they identify themselves like, hello, my name is Reginald. I have this disorder, this disorder, this disorder. That's where we get our validation from. No longer like, hey, I'm Kenneth. I like to skateboard and I like pie. Like, it's all about like, this is what's wrong with me. I'm
Or
so
I
broken.
get my clothes from this store at the mall.
yeah.
Well,
Right.
it's interesting thinking about in terms of how history ended, because I think it's more the fact that what Fukuyama forgets is that there's an unconscious aspect to it. And I don't mean it necessarily in a Lacanian sense, but in what Frederick Jameson in the political unconscious talks about, that there's an inability at the moment to be able to narrativize a symbolic mapping of what history is. And so, like, in a sense, we're caught in this sort of regression, and you see it in the algorithmic sense with like the trad wife culture, right? As an example, where there is a sort of romanticization of traditionalism that never in fact existed.
Right.
But in a way, it's an attempt to cognitively map of what it was like in the past, because we lack the symbolic coordinates to talk about what's going on currently. And I think that's like, where someone like Frederick Jameson can help. Like, how do we create a symbolic act that would help propel us to a historical method? Because it's like we're caught in an imaginary representation, which is ideological, of course, but we can't conceive of it as such because, we're so saturated by the image, right? Or the way that, our representation of reality is also a way in which we represent ourselves as well, but we don't have a sort of narrativization. And so history for him is not something imaginary or on the level of the image representation, but of the representative. In Lacanian terms, it is a master signifier if you want to get complex about it, but we lack a sort of a concrete term or significance to be able to locate where we are today in conjunction with the past and where the future is going.
Right. And doesn't that have a lot to do with the impossibility of transgression and the waning of any kind of transgressive power that is attached to your choice of signifier versus another person's choice of signifier, now that everything has become aestheticized to the point where whatever kind of transgressive weight, let's say, was attached to being a punk, being a hardcore punk, and the style of clothing and the way that people wore their hair and the fact that I mosh and break someone's nose and someone breaks my nose, and the idea that that would piss off the bourgeois morals of like a military dad. That kind of Bart Simpson vision that we had of a certain form of transgression that's no longer available to us and probably doesn't even chime with younger generations, because it's like, I think that we're old enough and we're from different generations. I know we've got Gen X here.
Yeah.
You're at the cusp.
I'm like the cusp of millennial and Gen
And-
Z, but I was
and
raised
I'm
by a Gen Xer.
Smack dab.
I am a proud
millennial.
Zennial, it turns out. You know, I best of both worlds.
We're at the top.
got a
But it's
nice
also
spectrum.
funny. Growing up, okay, at one point I started to realize every real Xer that I knew was like, you're a total millennial. And every real millennial I knew told me I was just totally an Xer.
Yeah, you're like in the cusp.
So
Yeah.
I am 82.
We're at two different cusps. So you're a different cusp.
Yeah.
He's one cusp. I'm smack dab in the middle. Nance, I can't speak for you. Because you could
What
be
year are you, Nance?
17 to 40.
I turned 40 this year.
Okay.
Actually, I turned 40 in like 2 weeks. So
Yeah, you're a Zennial. You're
Yeah.
with me.
Yeah. So we've got a nice spectrum of ages. But my point is, I think all of us can remember an era where you could be called out for appropriating a subculture's style, listening to a certain genre of music. It could be rap, it could be punk, and still get called out for inauthenticity.
posers.
Posers. You could
Yeah.
be a poser. Now there's this
You also could be a sellout.
or
A sellout.
exactly.
You can't be a sellout.
About being
no.
a poser. Like poser used to be a thing. Yeah.
Which to me means that there was an idea, at least an ideal of a fixed referent when it came to these signifiers that we adopt, where now everything's so cross-pollinated to a degree that I don't think, and I could be totally wrong about this, but I don't think Gen Z or Gen Alpha would even register that.
Yeah.
The idea of posers.
And another example I'll give is like, okay, what's going on right now in LA? We got a lot of protests, which are also being like obfuscated or co-opted in the media as being
Mhm.
violent, looting, and et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that LA has a history of riots and protests for as long as, like, you remember, since the 60s, still the Rodney King thing, even the parts of the George Floyd thing, and then up to like now. And you see a lot of Gen Z or / Gen A that are participating, but they don't have a sense of history to what the historical significance of solidarity and, how this all happened because of overdetermination of not only, xenophobia or immigration and the problem of the class struggle insofar as immigrants are part of the class struggle, but also, they forgot about, like, the way politically, like the instantiation of the border from Mexico to California politically charged everything, especially in Southern California. And of course, like, this is the best solidarity I've seen in LA and the US, like, since a long time. Like, this is the first time I've seen Southsider gang members, Crips, and Bloods unite for one single act, because before then, Crips and Bloods, of course, are known to be rivals, but they will come together to beef with some Mexicans because there's a racial tension in gangs. But for the first time, there's been some solidarity over a single cause, but there's the lack of the historical narrative that is absent, to where you see like Gen Zers going out to go to the protest, and you get a bunch of Edgars fading each other up right there on the sidewalk, giving each other fades right there, just like, hell yeah, we're out here chilling, Instagramming, and like, TikToking. And so, like, there's an example where you don't see, like, even not only like revolutionary solidarity, but also like you don't see like a sense of transgression. It's just them like performing and being cool, like, this is hip. And it's not to like backlash the movement, because I, as a Marxist, I respect the movement that's going on. But like with the Gen Zers, there is like a sense where it's like we do lack the narrativization that Frederick Jameson talks about, or inability to differentiate, like what Nick was saying about like posers versus like being authentic and real to the cause or whatever. So I like find that also interesting as well in real time.
Well, I would say, just from a Baudrillardian perspective, right? The continual implosion of the real, by which I mean, I don't mean the Lacanian real. I mean epistemological semiotic criteria that allow us to differentiate between real and copy or authentic and fake, right? And with the rise of social media, with the rise of this complete onslaught of imagery, digital images, yeah, this has been lost because all that counts is whatever the image is. And that's what Baudrillard means by fourth order value or fractal value. All that matters is if the image spreads across screens.
Well, doesn't he
And
the one that brings up the floating signifier or flotation of the signifier, or is that Jameson, which kind of like ties into that?
yeah, I think I don't recall that in Baudrillard. Maybe I've just forgotten it, um, but I mean that's interesting. I'm not sure if they would mean the same thing, but there's a sense where for Baudrillard, it's just a matter of spread. It's just a matter of contagion, and I mean it's funny we use the language going viral. So if that's the only standard of what counts as value for us is how much something spreads across screens, its ontological status doesn't matter. The only reality is how much it spreads, and so and if it doesn't spread, it doesn't mean it's a fake. It just doesn't spread. So yeah, it's this instance of where yeah, it's not like we're on screen trying to be real or fake it. Either like it doesn't matter. You're on screen. That's the only
Pixar
mark
didn't have it.
evaluation that's at play.
The image has become this new ontological ground for activity. Like if you're not doing it online, if you're not making images, you are not living in the same world. And I don't know, like it probably follows like generational cohorts, but it obviously doesn't, because there's also old people who spend all their time on screens and generating this kind of like imagistic life. So it's not just kids. I think it's everybody. I was going to say something.
It's kind of funny. It's kind of funny because I'm thinking about like, my activity on social media, and where like, when I first started making memes, I would get like 50 to like 100, depending on how like funny or like the meme was, or like if it was just like something that was just digestible. Now my memes will barely get like 10 likes, but if I post like a stack of books that I'm reading, I get over like 100 to 300 likes. And so it's like there's something about like the image. It's like you don't know if I'm reading that. Like I could literally just be posing, be like, yeah,
Well, isn't it the theory equivalent to the girls who are broke, but they scrounge up whatever money they can to do some glamorous photo shoot on some jet, like
Yeah,
some
Spirit Airlines.
That's why I buy Ray-Bans.
I mean, we're all guilty of this on some level.
Stay
in
looking
theory
fresh.
spaces, but
That might not even be your copy of Das Kapital.
Yeah.
It's like leaning on like a Tesla,
It's
or
funny,
you just go to Barnes and Noble or something and take a stack
Right.
of books and
Yeah.
photograph it in such a way you don't know where it's being taken. And
Well, and then it makes me think of like, because there's this like Instagram like real meme trend going on of like this dude like standing outside their restaurant or barber business, and they have somebody hold a broom like, hey, can you hold this real quick? Hey, you want to come inside? And they give them a haircut, and then they're like, hey, you hungry? And like, yeah. And then they're like said something like, oh yeah, the street. And then they're like, oh, here's a tissue. And then like they compile all those things to make an advertisement. Like, we wanted to do a charitable thing. We saw a homeless person sweeping outside the thing. So we offered him to come inside to get some warm shelter, and then gave him a free haircut. We asked if they were hungry. They're like, yeah. Like, where are you living right now? Oh, out of the street. And then here, and they started crying after the haircut, and they give him a tissue. So like the way that the image could be narrativized in an altered way is just like funny. Like in one sense, it's like trying to be a parody of like, charitable organizations that are for nonprofit. Like, are they really actually doing that, or they just pick somebody from the street to like advertise? But then it's like it is Baudrillardian in that sense.
Right. Well, what if we bring it back to therapy GPT real quick? Because I think one of the questions that's really like pressing on me right now that I hadn't thought about, and it's the point that you made, Mikey, which I think is brilliant. The idea that we could be the smotherers of AI, of these robots. And I think it kind of comes down to this question of K-Voy. It's like when I think about, and this doesn't just apply to Chat GPT therapy, but just Chat GPT in general, if it's giving me advice, if it's telling me the best way to do something that's not necessarily just like instrumental, what kind of a socially conditioned subject does it want me to be? And then if AI is developing desires of its own, what's the nature of its question posed to us? What is its K-void? What does it think we want from it? So one of the things that you said, Nance, is like you think that maybe a kind of subjectivity can emerge in machine learning, in AI, but to just put a Lacanian spin on it, I'm wondering what kind of subjectivity can emerge given that there is no meta language and AI is trying to develop a kind of a meta language. So I would really like to hear all of your thoughts on those questions.
I think for me, I think it's a bit too hubristic to assume that subjectivity belongs only to the kind of machines that we call biological. I think like with large language models and with gradient descent and with reinforcement learning, I don't think those will achieve subjectivity. So the current tech that exists today, I think it is pure positivity and like the way they work. And yes, these things have billions of parameters and yes, they're numbers so large as to be numinal. Like we just can't comprehend the sheer magnitude of the operations that these things are doing. But like the human brain still dwarfs them by at least an order of magnitude. Like we have an awful lot going on in the brain. I think eventually at some point silicone life is a sure thing for sure. But yeah, I do think it's just this purely positivistic, purely mechanistic. It is the Chinese room thing. It is just the Turing machine. And
Exactly.
And the thing that's so scary is that we are doing that. We're imitating that. Like AI and algorithms have imitated us up till now. But over this year, the first half of this year, there are an awful lot of people who just don't seem to care that it is just a big search engine at this point. It's a really good autocomplete. But people are engaging with it like it's a friend and like it's someone who can give you advice, a life coach and a therapist and this and that. And so like we are starting to imitate this. So it's not to say that I think subjectivity will emerge from what currently exists. It's to say that I think we're turning off the light switch in our own heads. And that's terrifying. Like it's not that we built our replacement. It's that we built something that has the potential to do what we do, and we're losing the ability to do what we do because we're just sitting back, fascinated with the shiny object.
I would like to add, because it's like, there is a difference between, and now of course we all know that, but maybe for the subject supposed to be listening, there is a distinction between like our brains and the epiphenomenal of, let's just say for lack of a better term, consciousness. That is a correlation between the brain, the chemical processes, the neurons, and consciousness, and subjectivity, right? Subjectivity is not consciousness. And the subjectivity, you could say, yeah, of course, there's something like a subjectivity that existed, in antiquity, the Greeks, and in Asia, and India, the time of the Buddha, and etc. But like the subjectivity that we are all interested in is, of course, the effect and advent of modern science, but also of Descartes. Descartes' code is the subject that we are. Pretty much, we are Cartesian subjects just because we're split, as far as Lacan intervention is because of psychoanalysis. And I think like with science, it's like, because it's the help of science and it's what I've in a project of working on from seminar 16 on Lacan. He calls absolutization of the market. And rather than dealing with the field of knowledge, science is now dealing and is coupled. And so it's dealing with the field of commodity production, which is quantifying jouissance. And so science is now being able to create new technology and new things for us to enjoy and feel satisfied and pleasurable and less pain. But science still, for Lacan, carries this paranoiac delusion in it. And this is exactly what we've been talking about, the what ifs. What if the AI do this? What if we do this to the AI bot? I mean, this is the exact paranoiac delusion that inframes modern science, right? And its process forecloses, the subject that is the Cartesian subject that posits itself not only as a thinking subject, but as one that doubts, right? And so, like, having room for doubt, I think, is what is also important for subjectivity. That we have a universe where doubt is possible versus one where we're just so saturated with paranoia and we're so certain about it that we can't even possibly doubt it. That doesn't mean that, like, oh, we're all just like need to go back to Cartesian philosophy, but I think there is like a sort of kernel to like what Descartes and the advent of modern subjectivity allows for is for us to doubt, because that's what not only allows us to depathologize science, aka psychoanalysis, but also allows us to prevent from falling into further delusions and even being saturated by everything that we've been talking about was with the pros and cons of AI and modern society.
Yeah, I fuck heavy with Descartes, man. I've been
Descartes cool as fuck.
Yeah, Descartes my homie.
Yeah, I think Descartes cool again. I've been reading Descartes, and I was just like, why do we hate on Descartes? Like, Descartes cool.
Because motherfuckers don't get it.
I love him.
I'm saying, dude.
I want to write a book about him. I've got a specific, very like dialed in project, and I mean, this is like 3 or 4 books down the road for me, but I have an idea that I want to do on Descartes. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing.
I've been cooking up some Descartes too.
With you two here, I did have a question, and I was hoping we would find a spot where I could ask both of you as Lacanians what you think of this. Okay, because there's a book that Nance and I both really like. It's not a theory classic. It's not a being in time or a being in nothingness or blah blah blah. It's a book called Natural Born Cyborgs by a guy named Andy Clark, and I love this book. Nance, we both love this guy's thesis, and I think this guy, even though he's not operating in any of like the theory realm that we're in, I think he's interesting to anyone who's a Lacanian, because this is what I want you guys to think about and tell me what you think. So in my book, I have a stretch of it where I'm engaging with Clark's work. And what I do there is I make the case that, and I should have made, maybe in the second edition, I'll make this bold claim, because I think maybe I need the bold claim. I think that you could argue on Clarkian Lacanian grounds that we ourselves are the first artificial intelligences on this planet. Now, this is the logic here. Okay, we know that all life forms on this planet contains a certain level of intelligence. Like, amoebas, if they get too close to heat, they move away from it. So there's self-preservative intelligence even in amoebas, right? We certainly know that dolphins and dogs are very intelligent in their own ways. Okay, here's the weird thing about us. There is a way that we are artificial. There it is. Nancy's got it. The book. So here's how we're artificial in comparison to every other organism on this planet. Our brains, and so here's the weird thing. I'm making a Lacanian argument in the book, but I have to use D&G to make it. So D&G have this idea, you guys know it, of the rhizome and aparallel evolution and blah, blah, blah. And look, at some point, wasps and orchids formed an evolutionary connection with one another, where the wasp fertilizes the orchids, so it becomes essential to the reproduction of the orchids, but the orchids also become essential food source, etc., for the wasps, and so the wasp's reproduction survives on the orchid. And you want to go, which came first, the wasp or the orchid, chicken or the egg? But the point is, they formed a rhizomatic connection at some point during their evolutionary processes, and okay, became rhizomatically connected. So what's weird about us, and you guys, if I try to make this argument to say an analytic philosopher, I'd have a lot more work to do. But you guys share my priors, you share my theoretical presuppositions. So when I say it, you'll go, oh, yeah. We're the beings. Do you know that our brain cannot come to biological maturation without having learned a language?
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
have to have the big other. And what is the big other? It is this artificial, non natural or unnatural semiotic reservoir of dead signifiers. And if we do not get it, feral children, I cite the famous cases of feral children in the book. These kids did not have brains that came to healthy maturation precisely because they did not have the big other. They did not have the symbolic order in the way that we have it. And so what you find is that the human brain actually contains too many connections as a default setting, and signifiers prune and give us our human level of intelligence. And if you don't have the symbolic order, you don't have a human subject, right? This is artificial intelligence compared to every other being on this planet. And so maybe, though, our fear of AI is some fear about ourselves, where we have to stand back and realize, you know, we did this first. We are the first AIs. And so whatever comes down, the line is some derivative of something that happened with us, where a being, an intelligence, had to take on the other, some foreign system of signifiers, and coding in computers is signifiers, right? That this is an extension of us, and instead of seeing it as this radical Lovecraftian otherness, there's some way we can see it as the extant realization of ourselves. What do you think of that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is what Nance and Andrew and I feel like we were talking about this earlier. Just to put a kind of Marxist spin on it too, it's like that these modes of production under capitalism, as they instrumentalize, as they condition, whichever verb you want to use to describe how our subjectivities are formed under capitalism. What we are witnessing is not some totally new emergence, but just a kind of very violent acceleration of what has always been. Now, in terms of a certain Marxist logic, it's like a quantitative change can lead to, or quantitative like accumulation can lead to a qualitative change at some point, but I think it's impossible to really pinpoint exactly when one tips over into another. But that's something different from the Lacanian take on what you're talking about, which is this gap, which is represented by the unconscious and the signifier as a whole, which allows us to grasp the circuitry and insert ourselves into the circuitry of the symbolic order as some semblance of an individual. So I think what's really fascinating about AI is that it also responds to signifiers. There's a binary logic at work. There are pluses and minuses, and the signifier at its most elemental is a plus and a minus. It is, just like Andrew was talking about earlier, a cybernetic game of odds and evens. Seminar 2. I couldn't help but think about Jean-Luc Nancy and Philippe Lacoue-Labarthe have this essay. It's like a long form essay on another essay, the creed, the title of the letter, Well, their book is called The Title of the Letter. The Acree is the
Purloined Letter.
The agency of
the letter. It's something
or
letter.
reason since Freud.
Yeah.
They call the signifier in that book an algorithm. The basic form of the signifier is algorithmic, and I take that to mean almost like it's as if this, maybe without getting too phenomenological, we experience the signifier as almost like a series of directives. But the difference between, I think, the way AI might respond to a signifier and the way we as individuals live out the signifier, the logic of the signifier, is that, again, it goes back to this kind of utilitarian notion of really being able to fully respond to the demand of the other versus a series of directives embedded in the signifier that don't actually reach any ultimate outcome in terms of like approximating an other that is a godlike entity with a will or anything like that. The other is heterogeneous. The other is inconsistent, and the other is lacking. It's Bart. There's a hole in the other. Can the signifier be that for artificial intelligence?
Right.
I don't know if that was a little bit meandering, but I hope I'm making a point there. Yeah.
I'll add to that.
Hold on, Andrew. Let me say one thing, because then I want you to incorporate this riff off of this too, just real quick. Look at the basic definition of algorithm. A process or set of rules to be followed in calculations or other problem-solving operations, especially by a computer. Hold on. A process or set of rules to be followed in calculations. If you are interpolated by the signifier, you are a Christian. If this is what the parent says to the child, you are a Christian. That is a set of rules to be followed that establish a kind of programmatic. That's what the symbolic mandate does. It gives you a kind of program to follow. And so we could say the signifier is algorithmic in that precise sense. If you name somebody a Christian, if you name them a Muslim, if you name them an atheist, if you like, there's certain operations or behaviors that you're expected to embody based on that. So I just wanted to make that connection.
No, absolutely, because I was about to riff on that too. Like, like to go into the first point about the cyborg thing. Well, like, maybe the cyborg is like a sort of far stretch, but I see the point. I'm just not tapped into like all this stuff to be able to say like, we're cyborgs, like you and Nance are. But I will say no, I agree, because like so before I get to the Lacanian approach, if you take Marx seriously, then there's no way we could ever take serious this sort of old humanism of like the noble savage, or this sort of romanticist conception of like being one with nature. No, nature and us are alien from each other, and we have to mediate nature through the labor process and metabolic rift, to quote John Bellamy Foster. But the fact that we mediate through nature because of the productive consumption process and metabolization of it through the social relations, the fact that we are never on our own, that we live in a society that demands, labor and etc. For us to survive, but that requires tools, that requires factories, that requires houses for us to shelter ourselves to continue to do the process next day. So we are never without tools or technology and sciences to continuously interrogate and advance that. If you want to get Heideggerian, it's like, the readiness to hand an assignment of the hammer and stuff like that. Whatever it is, it's like, choose your poison. The fact is that like, there is no human without tools. Bernard Stiegler is another person that talks about this. So like, it's sort of like, it goes to the point. It's like, we are artificial in the sense that no matter when we alter or change or transform our being over time, we alter our essence as well. Now, to put it in Lacanian terms, the signifier, right? And so what is interesting about the signifier is that it's not only sort of marked on me by other speaking beings that, I live with and that brought me into existence, that even talked about me before I existed. That's the difference between, thinking and being. That for Lacan, to think doesn't mean that you could be. right? Because thinking is formulated by language, and language is brought to you by the other. Think about when you're in the womb of the mother. What are we going to name him or her? I'm thinking about the room that we're going to design for them, the toys. What do you think? Are they going to go to college when they turn 18? These are already signifiers that are impinged upon you before you are even thrown into the world. So the signifier has already inaugurated your existence before your being has been freaking thrown into the living world. So there is a materiality of the signifier and your identity before you are even physically in the life world or the worldhood or whatever term you want to use. And that also plays an account of this idea of being artificial, not only because of materiality, but also, like you said, the algorithmic aspect of it, because words or signifiers don't have a referent for Lacan. They may have a trace, but not a trace that leads to something natural or referent, but that a signifier relies on its meaning from another signifier. And in a sense, an algorithmic code relies on another code to get its differentiation from. An example, and I love Sam McCormick for this, but if you look into the dictionary, what is the definition of a cat? You have other words other than the word cat that define the meaning of the word cat. The definition of a cat, a four-legged, furry, feline fucker. That is the definition of the cat, according to Sam McCormick, right? So you need other signifiers to differentiate other signifiers. And so in analysis, what is interesting is that for Lacan, right, when he's talking about jouissance, he's talking about the body. It always relates back to the body, but it's never this corporal, phenomenological representation of the fact that I have my arms waving like this. No, it's the body of jouissance that's marked about the signifier. And so when I'm able to free associate and talk about my symptom and identifications, I'm constructing a virtual body of jouissance by the signifier that allows me to sublimate my symptom. And so there's already something artificial about the analytic
Virtual
process
reality.
of virtual reality, because
Oculus Rift.
right, because I'm already
Like
in a
your
virtual
body,
reality
yeah.
because of fantasy, right? I'm alienated from my own being because of the symbolic big other.
Is Oculus Rift already an outdated reference?
I don't even know.
Yeah, straight
Right?
up, man.
Like, yeah, but like to say like what like you mentioned Lakula Barth, it's the signifier that has this sort of algorithmic take, and I've been reading a lot of Milner. We wouldn't have the signifier without mathematics and language, and because we live in a society where modern science exists, modern science is only modern because it's Galilean, and that means that we've created a universe versus a world of logos and antiquity where episteme relies on technology, which means that you're all about the letter, you're all about the T to the T precision to create something. And the signifier is all about precision, the signifier of the letter, which is also the precision of my symptom insofar as I could speak about it, right? So I'm creating a precise, over time, body of jouissance based upon language to be able to map out my symptom,
Yeah, but this whole thing is what you're getting at. Like death drive, jouissance, objet petit a, none of these exists for us without language.
Exactly.
And there's a dialectical relationship, or there's an eximent relationship, and they come out of the friction or gap, however you want to talk about it, between our pre-linguistic bodies, our biological bodies, and language. And so what I try to emphasize, like Lacanians don't talk about the brain, but the core material dimension is our central nervous system. That's what gets derailed by the signifier. And it gets derailed from just having standard. Why do animals not engage in self-destructive activities on the level that we do? Right? Because language opens up idealization, fantasy, etc. Right? We can't do these things without it. And so that's kind of my point here, is that we're artificial or we're cyborgs. All right, look, if the four of us were actually in a room together and we were introduced to a guy, and he literally had his body filled with nanobots, and if we cut his arm off, it would just grow another arm. He would be radically different to us because of this technological modification. we don't because language is the water that we fishes swim in, we don't see it as nanobots. But that's the point. To all other animals on this planet, our ability to exist in and assimilate language it's like having nanobots. And so again, because it's so natural to us, it's so invisible to us, the radicality of how language is a kind of technology, or a rift in our relationship to nature, it's just invisible to us without theory. But what Lacanianism, I think, does better than anything, and this is why I think both of it's weird. I'm not trying to interpolate you and give you a symbolic mandate, but I will say this. I think anybody who's a Lacanian theorist right now, whether they know it or not, is also an AI theorist. And the reason I think that is because Lacanian theory is the greatest theory of subjectivity that we have on this planet. And as we start to wrestle more and more, and this is only going to intensify, with the question of what counts as a human subject, what counts as a subject as such, and what is merely a machine or a simulation of a subject, Lacanianism is only going to become more and more relevant, because we don't have look, religion's going to have a part to play with this, because religion can just go, we have a soul, the robot doesn't, end of discussion. But for people like us, that's not going to be a satisfactory response. It might work for certain people, but for us, we're going to need a little bit more to go on than just an appeal to an elusive substance that we don't have empirical evidence of. So with Lacanianism, we have this robust theory of subjectivity, and it gives us something to go off of in determining what counts as subject and what doesn't.
Yeah, and last thing I'll say is, because it goes back to the AI and therapy. I mean, one of the things that it seems like we're trying to do with AI and the speculation of the companion bot or the caregiver is also something. If you talk to ChatGPT, what is a sexual relationship? They're going to give you XX to XY as XY as to XX, or yin and yang is to yin, boy is to girl as girl is to boy. Or, you can make it in whatever you want, regardless of programming. But there's always going to be this sort of complementarity. And that's the one thing that psychoanalysis, because of the unconscious structure of like a language, is getting at, of what the symptom is the problem of the absence of a sexual relation. And that is embedded in the primal fantasy of union with the other. Whether I objectify the other into a small part, objet A, to complete me, or as the hysteric, trying to create something to complete the lack in the field of knowledge, the other, because the lack in the other is also responsible for me not being able to find any ground of what it means to be a woman, right? That's the hysteric. And so this is exactly what psychoanalysis, because it's able to see the unconscious in the relationship with signifiers, is able to point out that there is no signifier to complete the other. There is no signifier that can explain the sexual relationship. We can only make statements about this impossibility. And this is exactly what people in the clinic are doing. They're caught within the fantasy of Edenic bliss, of being lost in this narcissistic love where they're encapsulated in one with the other. And this is the problem. And this is what repeats. And this is what we are trying to make them realize and traverse. Because in the AI bot, they're going to do exactly what I just said, XY to XX, right? They're going to think of sexuality and love as union, right? The psychoanalysis, there is no union.
So I love this point. I want to ask you, Nance, and you, Nick, right? Like, because I love this point Andrew's making. So think about it. Because I kind of want to condense his point into like a formulation. So here's the thing. Do you think that AI, or the LLM as we have it right now, can it even itself process the concept of the non-relation between human beings? Is this something, I mean, it can spit out words, but does it really get this radical sense of singularity, or incompatibility between speaking subjects to form a whole?
Well, civilization hasn't done a good job of registering that non-relation.
Very good
It's
point.
like To even articulate what Lacan's talking about, it took quite a few Freudian discoveries. But what does Lacan say? There is no meta language, and he follows it up with, or worse,
Yeah,
there is no sexual relation.
Yeah.
So he says what he speaks this tension in very certain terms by having the one statement follow the other. Now, I don't know virtually anything about these LLMs. I'm very uneducated when it comes to the technology behind artificial intelligence, but I'm assuming that the question of desire that we've been hammering home in this discussion, and whether or not artificial intelligence has anything like a desire that would be constituent of subjectivity, is directly related to and a result of the fact that there is no meta language. So can the language of machine learning, of code, ever produce a meta language? And just to simplify things, my understanding of a meta language, it's just like a language that would account for all of language, that would explain and put in place all of the different elements of the language that we use. Once you use language, you're caught up in it. There's no way of stepping outside of it.
Mhm.
Now, whole seminars have been written on how we get from there is no meta language to there is no sexual relation. But essentially, it's like the unconscious is what emerges in the gap between these two statements, in my opinion. The unconscious is what cannot resolve the signifier into a totalizing system. And because of that, we can't symbolically situate man and woman, yin and yang, in terms of a pure complementarity. So I have absolutely no idea what AI would make of that conundrum, or if AI will be faced with that conundrum, because, well, it doesn't need to propagate the species in the same way that we do. And I think that the fact of the non-relation isn't just a truth that we need to come to terms to. It's actually embedded in the very reality of the perpetuation of the species itself. In simple terms, because there is no sexual relation, we're able to have sex. We're able to copulate. So what that would mean for machines, for artificial intelligence, I have no idea. So I hope I'm not like copping
No,
out.
that was really good, Nick.
Yeah.
I mean, look, there's so much to think about here. So, Nance, I mean, look, this question of the non-relation, which is we do not have some preordained, providential guarantee of a compatible relationship with another human being. There, of course, that we can all relate in various ways. Hey, we love philosophy. We all have an interest in Lacanian theory. Sure, there's ways we can relate, but do we ever fully click together in the way that fantasy dreams about clicking together with another person, like a soulmate figure? So this dimension of each one of us has a radical singularity to us that cannot be captured in language. There is no meta language that can fill in the gap and say, oh, here's Mikey's singularity, here's Nance's, Andrew, Nick's, here's how it all clicks together. Nothing like that exists. I think this is where we see a point of at least interest between Lacan and Levinas.
Yeah.
And so I wonder what you're thinking about when it comes to this non-relation thing. We're at least moving in a direction towards Levinasian infinity, And is this something that AI can even begin to comprehend at the moment?
I think so. Zero, the introduction of zero into Western math was like a revolutionary moment. We talked about this, Mikey, in a video that'll be coming up soon, a very exciting video. But we talked about what was it, Renaissance numeracy or whatever. But the moment where zero becomes
And Masonic arithmetic?
Oh, yeah.
that's
Oh,
what it
no,
was, Masonic arithmetic.
I can't wait to get in my part of this, but keep talking, Hans, because now you're spitting.
So
Now you're spitting.
zero becomes this moment, like zero is a nothing that noths, and it totally revolutionizes the way we relate to math. Previously, math was like an extension of the body. Math was this kind of personal thing, and so it was you did it with like people you knew. You did it with the guy at the market. You went to go give him 10 bales of hay. You go get 10 eggs or 12 eggs or whatever. But it's always like this personal thing, and there was really no need for zero, because we didn't have to conceptualize lack. We didn't have to conceptualize negation, because we had like a natural relationship to it. We lived in a positivistic world, but in a very different way from the positivistic world that we live in today. And the introduction of zero, I think, kind of coincided with a lot of other things that allowed for capital to emerge. So zero becomes a singularity in a way, like we can see that zero is nothing, but we can also see that nothing is always already full. Because we already have like a phenomenological natural relation to the world, and it's embodied and it's kind of emergent, and it just kind of springs up because we are riding around in bodies, and we understand necessity, and we are caught up in this metabolic activity, but we're also the producers of the framework at the same time. So it's all natural, which is a horrible word to use. But when we introduced zero, it kind of allowed to abstract the personal embodied relations to the global stage and to the global setting. And so we not overnight, that's sensational, but we became caught up in history. We became global subjects as opposed to just kind of local subjects. So like the global view became imposed on us. But it wasn't as traumatic. It wasn't as such a big breakdown, or at least it wasn't as rapid, because we are animals. We have bodies. So like there's this subjectivity thing, and there's this radical nothingness that is at the same time infinite productivity, and it's a singularity. But we already understand singularity. Machines don't, because machines are just built on arithmetic. Like zero is not a singularity for the machine. Zero is just the absence of a one. So I think along with like the subject object, that we also we're split, and the world itself is split. And so like nothing always noths for us, but for machines, it can't, because it's just pure counting. It's pure ordinal. Like there is one, there is not one. Whereas we can understand, like I can't even express myself fully. So how could I conceptualize you?
Noted as zero, counted as one, or is that Lacan?
So that's Malaire, and this is that Lacan will semi-agree with like this whole suture thing, but it's actually wrong.
Without getting it.
Yeah.
I like that
Yeah,
phrase.
so-
noted as zero, counted as one.
So yeah, no, I wanna add a lot to that, because you brought up like a lot of good pivot points, because it really it brings to heart like why Lacan is so obsessed with language, which is actually more different than the linguistics like Jakobson and Saussure, which leads into the mathematical paradigm. But I just wanted to add to one thing that like Nick was saying. I think could bring to light even the problem of AI, even outside like LLMs, but like like in an algorithm. Like look at dating apps. Like Mikey brought up dating apps. Like any AI, no matter if it is able to operate on its own, it still needs that sort of classical deist thing of the god as the watchmaker who just starts the thing and lets it operate on its own afterwards. And think about it like this, like with the algorithm and dating apps, you have to at least give an input for it to be able to do the rest of the outputs. So in a dating app, I could put I'm 6'1", even though like I'm like 5'6", because nobody likes a short king. No snowflakes, MAGA, and the picture of me holding the fish that I just caught, with the dip in my mouth. And so that will literally send an algorithmic probability of who I will be likely compatible with. Again, the key term is compatibility, complementarity. In the problems of love and love matters, the algorithm can't help but bring complementarity into the algorithmic function. And in a matter of combinatory factions, insofar as I give a list of inputs, I just need like 2 inputs, a 0 and a minus, what I like and what I don't like. I love to go fishing. I hate snowflake liberals. There's the amount of combinatory factors that I can get in the algorithm. But to go back to this whole thing about infinity and the 0 point, so like in natural numbers, 0 makes sense if you start at the beginning and then you get 1, 2, and 3. And natural numbers and natural counting is what we do to be able to exchange a stack of hay for a pound of corn, or 2 yards of linen makes 1 coat, right? This is the way that we do natural numbers, to get around the world. But then you got irrational numbers like, square roots, square root of 2 and shit like that. And then there's real numbers, which puts into problem the question of infinity, because we could, even though we'd be counting forever when it comes to infinity, in natural numbers, it's still intuitive and still possible, even though we would be fucking wasting our times doing that. But in the real numbers, we start from 0.00000000001 before we could even count to 1. And this is Lacan's ingenuity with signifier and language because of objet A, the gap or the hole into structure. And so rather than thinking of objet A as 0, it's, as Zizek makes famous, a less than nothing. Yeah. So objet A, no matter how much I count, there's always something that's being abstracted away. So objet A is a new algebraic numerical function that is dividing and extracting or subtracting, but it never leads to 0, but it never leads to something. It's always a less than nothing, right? It's always something that I can never really account for into my system of language, but is always something that still moves me as a sort of subject, right? And he lists this brilliantly in Seminar 16 when he's talking about Pascal's wager, but mainly what he's trying to talk about is like the problem of identity in the signifier and of jouissance as surplus and object little a, and Fibonacci sequence of increasing series and decreasing. And just, I'm not a Fibonacci scholar or anything like that, but just to put it succinctly, you have 2 series. You have 1 plus a, and then the decreasing series is 1 minus a, which means it's like you're trying to formulate yourself as a subject, but no matter what, objet A is that hole in you and in the other, so that there's always a subtraction and an addition. So you never go anywhere. You're always at a return point. You're always at this point, of decrease in tension and increase in excitation. And this is death drive right here, because you end up going back to this minimal point, right? Of starting over and repeating, right? And that's formulated through our language system, going from mathematics to language. But he sees language like mathematical logic because this is what the signifier is trying to do. It's trying to count, but then it has to account for itself, because what the signifier is really doing, and this is why he's not a pure linguist, is because the signifier and language is really a reference point to talk about the subject, which is absent in all this process, the split subject.
Yep.
So it's like against
just real quick, I just want to point out, like, just to make a conceptual connection to all of this, to what you said, Nance, to what what both of you were saying. Look, what does Zizek call the negative subject? The 0 point of subjectivity, right? And so I would go back. We were talking about Descartes a minute ago. Descartes is the one who discovered this 0 point of subjectivity. And he does it in meditation too. Now, his problem is he goes on and turns it back into a 1. a pure positive subject. But in meditation 2, it is a pure negation of all of his imaginary symbolic coordinates, his positive features, right? I don't
Absolutely.
think it's possible for him to arrive at this 0 point of subjectivity without the rise of the mathematical function of zero, right? And so, I mean, I would have to make that case. But the point is, it's the mathematical zero that gets us in the position to start thinking about what it is to be a subject. The non-relation, right? This singularity that we all are, ultimately is a 0 point of subjectivity. It's we're the and I know for somebody who's not who's new to Lacanian theory, this is, I know there's no way to not make this somewhat jargony because it's hard to talk about it in any other terms. But the point is, there's some part of us as subjects that's there, even when all of our positive characteristics, even when you disassociate me from my facial features, through the from the clothes I wear, from my class status, from my my preferences in movies, right? When you strip all that away, there's something that remains of me as a subject, right? But it doesn't have any positive features to it. And it's in that sense, it's a 0 point of subjectivity, and that is what is encountered or reckoned with in subjective destitution. And so I just wanted to connect these, like the non-relation and mathematical zero and the 0 point of subjectivity, they're all at play here. And
Yeah.
what we're all getting at in different ways is something that a code system right now, as it currently exists, does not comprehend. And you can even try to prompt it. Maybe it spits out some words it gets off the internet from Alenka Zupancic or from Zizek or something, but it doesn't comprehend what the hell it's talking about. How, to be a subject is to not be any reducible to the positive defining features of you, right?
Yes.
That 0 point, it doesn't get. And maybe one day it will, but right now it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean that's why like Lacan is so he's so adherent to like Freud's essay on Verneinung or negation. The subject was of the that patient's unconscious was the statement of that's not my mother. And I think to bring it in simple terms, like because Lacan is like caught within this sort of structural milieu where he tries to like adhere to some structuralist notions and linguistic mathematics, but also do something new to reading Freud because I mean, let's look at about like the terms that were used, like oneness and 0 point and what I'm not. Freud talks about oneness not only in like what I was talking about in Civilization of Discontent about like oceanic bliss and this feeling of like oneness, but that there was a moment in our time where we're being taken care of by the caregiver and our demands are being satisfied. We had this moment of one singular sense of enjoyment or satisfaction, right? And it is, of course, encapsulated by this hallucinatory form that Freud talks about in the Project for Scientific Psychology, as well as in Dreams and Interpretation of Dreams. And then it takes on this new form of that's not that in the theories of sexuality, where the sexual object is always a refining of an object just to be like, that's not it. To which we get it exemplified in the Fort Da game of tossing the toy to get it back, only to toss it back. We're constantly, as subjects, negating everything, but never affirming of what we really are. We're only inaugurating that we're not this, or this is not my satisfaction. So this is the oscillation between -1 and the 0 point to try to get at the sense of Edenic bliss. Going back to Eden, right?
And I mean, when Mikey was just talking about like the whole Cartesian skeptical inventory, let's say, in which you empty yourself of any positive qualities, any imaginary symbolic correlates to your being. Milner talks about that in A Search for Clarity and how it's like the logic of I think if I'm remembering correctly, the signifier is like the knowledge correlate of that exact process. And like what Lacan's trying to do is come up with a science of sorts, big inverted commas, but with science there, because that's a whole sticky wicket that we might not want to touch right now, but a science of sorts that would stay at the level of Descartes in the second meditation before he counts himself as one, holds on to that, retains that moment in which that sort of suspension is epoch defining in a way, and creates the ideal of a science in psychoanalysis which would address that Cartesian subject. And the fascinating thing is that that kind of emptying out isn't just a thought experiment. It can occur if you undergo psychoanalysis. There is a phenomenological reality to subjective destitution that I don't think it can necessarily occur through just pure speculation. But if you attend these sessions for long enough, then there would be this kind of emptying out. Eventually, there will be kind of a reconfiguration of certain symbolic, imaginary symbolic coordinates, because you can't exist without them in some way, without succumbing to a kind of radical psychic autism. But the whole point is, and this is taking us somewhat far afield from our original discussion, is that if psychoanalysis is something like a science, what kind of science would it be? And why is it still nascent in a way? And why does it, and how does it address something that none of these other sciences are? And is it even possible? This ideal of a science of the signifier, and one that embraces the Cartesian subject emptied of its contents.
Nance, it's to pivot off of that, what you just brought in to the equation, Nick, with science. I mean, think about it. Nance, you brought in mathematical zero, and now we're talking about subjective zero. But there's a way Lacan himself connects the desiring subject to the scientific subject. Why? Because the subject of science has to occupy a kind of experiential 0 point. You have to detach yourself from the experiment. You have to bracket out your preference as much as you can, right? It's kind of an ideal. But the subject of science is a pure knower without any partiality, any ideological preferences, any of that. And so what we have here is like mathematical zero, subjective zero, scientific zero. What do you think of that?
I think that like we kind of move toward Levinas, and I think like the thing that allows you to hold open that negation, or to hold open the gap, or to kind of sit in the contradiction and sit in the kind of valley of all these positivistic things, I think is your non-relation, and like your ability to recognize that, and your ability to recognize the other and recognize yourself by way of recognizing the other, totally knowing that it's an incomplete recognition. Like that is what the magic that makes us do it. So maybe, I don't know, maybe that's just like empirical evidence that psychoanalysis and ethics and philosophy isn't all just like bullshit. Like they are all different kind of avenues trying to get at something that is, what is it to be? What is it to be me? And I don't.
We say modernity is zero.
I mean, the thing is, Sean and I were talking, and actually we're going to have another conversation about like modernity. Like, what would happen if modernity actually delivered on its promise? Like the promise of modernity is actually an awesome thing. Like the promise of emancipation, and the promise of self-actualization, and the promise of being able to be effective and edify yourself in the world. Like that's all awesome. And I think I go pretty far into what people call postmodernism, and I think there's a lot going on there. But yeah, I do think at least the idea at the core of all this stuff is a good one. Like, people want to feel good, people want to be happy, people want to self-actualize and be effective in the world. And capital is this oceanic creature that latched onto our desire in this way and kind of hoodwinked us all into participating in this global game of fucking genocide and horrible, horrible things, because the promise of self-actualization, the promise you can be the liberal subject, you can be free, you can determine your own most, you can do all that stuff. Like, it's not just libidinal, it's actually fucking spiritual. Fuck it. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I think we have to hold on to zero, and the machine right now doesn't do zero. The machine right now does this thing where it's just the absence of one. It can't do the less than nothing. That's what we do. That's what humans are. It's what we do. The machine currently can't do that. And again, barring speculation about can it doesn't right now. And I think we're in danger. Like, it's not just this thing that the idea of therapy GPT makes me feel kind of sad and kind of gross, but also empathize with the people who have no other option. Like, I think we're approaching a moment where, like, hey, it's time to put up or shut up. I believe in subjectivity. I value subjectivity more than I value consumer satisfaction, more than I value other things. And it's just, there's a lot of people excited about AI right now, and there's a lot of people talking about therapy GPT and stuff like that. But what conversation I've seen about it has all largely been dissatisfying, because they're not really going into what makes a subject. What's the difference between analysis and not even therapy, but therapy GPT? Like, they don't really reckon with that. Yes.
Yeah. Hold on, guys. I'll be right back. Hold on.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think, like, and this is why, like, I'm a Marxist for many reasons, but, like, ultimately, like, even though we're all, for lack of a better term, cogs in the machines, or like, we're in the matrix and we just got blue pill, red pill, black pill, whatever types of pills you want now. But the ruling, the ideology is always going to be like the ruling ideas of the ruling class. Now, that doesn't mean that those are the only ideas, because the proletariat or the working class or the lumpen proletariat or anybody ancillary that doesn't own the means of production, they still have ideas. I mean, like in D&G, and for lack of a better term, for better or for worse, can help us with this with molecularization, or Badiou with the events and the group subjects. We have ways into which we show that it's not just the ruling ideas. But what I'm getting at right here is because, like, ultimately we're still being sort of torn apart by the ruling ideology, but it's not just about ideas. And I think this is why psychoanalysis helps, because it's also about enjoyment, right? Not just in jouissance, but also otium, leisure. And I don't know if you guys know this guy. I just mentioned it a few days ago to Nick, but he was an Italian-American Marxist who had a radical break from Marxism, and he went full-on conservative Catholic. His name is Eugene Genovese. He wrote in a Gramscian methodology the history of U.S. slavery and the Civil War, and that because of the dominance of slavery as the means for labor production within the South, that for America, the American ideology, or ideology as enjoyment, allowed for the birth and construction of an ideology of pleasure and leisure, to which we would bring over guests, have entertainment, and all these types of things that transition not only into like post-Reconstruction, post-slavery, but also into like the Roaring '20s and up until now, where we're in a predominant ideology of constant leisure, right? So it's like a matter of like who does the labor, right? So that the dominant ruling class can have leisure. I mean, the ruling class, they don't care about mathematics. They're not trying to like study Einstein or do what we're doing. We're a bunch of working class dudes that are talking about theory. Meanwhile, they're going on retreats. They're hiking. They're trying to find themselves.
They're fucking kids.
Isn't that yeah?
You know?
That yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but isn't ceaseless activity what they're going for though? Isn't they have all this leisure time? Leisure becomes the enemy for them though, right? Because it's like that when you see depictions of the ruling classes in Renaissance paintings, it's like like a chubby woman like lying
Mhm.
soup, like eating grapes or some shit. It's like that is the antithesis of what the ruling class wants to appear as. I mean, it's like they what do they want? I mean, at a certain point, it's like to be strong, fast, or in Elon Musk's case, to be like a comedian, to be anything but what was associated with the ruling class before, which is to be corpulent and
Yeah.
and like not move and just to stand there like Henry VIII was the ideal.
Right. I will say, like with Lacan and Otium and Leisure in Seminar 16, he will say like it's not enough to have like a week vacation to go out at skiing, but you also had to account for like the 4 days you need to recover after that, you
Mhm.
know, so
Recover from the leisure.
recover from the leisure, right?
Yeah.
But no, it's not that like, like I definitely agree with that because I think that is also like the sort of way in which you have to disavow. You have to like appear that you're hardworking, yourself like actualizing, and you're always optimal, right? And again, it goes back to self-excellence, but it's like leisure and otium allow for you to excel for yourself insofar as that there is a bunch of peons or there's another class that are doing the labor that you don't have to do so that you can actualize yourself, right? That's
Well,
like the whole point.
I think that's kind of, I think Baudrillard sums it up when we're talking about sign value. It used to be about distinction. It used to be about signaling distance from necessity. But fractal value is this viral contagion. It's the churn. Like it's this thing that has to keep going. So the ruling class, like, you can't just buy a yacht and fuck chicks and drink. Like you have to Instagram it. You have to put it on. You have to show the world. You have to show the image. Picture it didn't happen. Once again, that's the world that we live in now. Like that is what fractal value is about. And I don't know. I think this is like getting into production and stuff. I don't know. Like where production is at a weird moment in history. Like are the working class going to be a necessity anytime soon? I think right now it's probably true. The knowledge class or the laptop class or whatever, they're probably in most danger for their jobs. But I think soon, the billions of people who have to work for a living will also be in danger of losing that work. And kind of then what do we do? And then we can talk about like UBI and then we could talk, I don't know, but it's value has something fucky's happened to value. And that's connected in this too. And that is pertinent to the conversation about therapy and about self-worth and self-actualization and all that stuff too. And that's another element that I think is missing from most of the conversation going on. I think
It made me think of like when you're talking about UBI, was it Jody Dean's criticism of it to what she calls UBS, Universal Basic Services, to where like those are actualized more than UBI because UBI is still income and that's money and money is still the universal equivalent of all commodities. That's at tension with value and price and its actualization, and so I don't know, like I mean services and maybe again that will also put into the question the caregiving services as well with AI. But I think like there's something to that which would get at a more dialectical way to use Mikey's terms. I want situations or worlds where I could have better struggles. I think we need to have a framework where we could have better struggles, right?
I like that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the only thing I would add is just look, Baudrillard was always thinking about these different types of value. And for him, at the end of his life, he was thinking about this fractal value, integral value. But I think with AI, as we know it, we have to start thinking about some other type of. And Nance has been thinking about this a lot lately, but I agree with him. And I don't know what to call it. I don't know how it'll work because I think it's emerging right now. It's hard to say how AI will affect Think about just take the three forms of commodity value Baudrillard talked about. We all know them: use value, exchange value, and sign value. Throw in fractal value in the age of the internet, but then you bring in AI and you go, what does it do to do any of these four forms of value function at all like they have once AI arrives? Like, what does it do to exchange value? What does it do to use value? I mean, is there going to be a revolution in how things function, different assignments, etc.? Sign value. What does, I mean, how do we, in what sense do we get our, connotative identities from commodities when AI does everything? And then fractal value. I mean, I don't know what it means to, Kim Kardashian has much fractal value.
Yeah.
In the age of AI, when it can generate images of perfect bodies and blah, 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 like
Deep
what is
fakes.
it? Does it deep fakes? What does it do to fractal value? So all of these forms of value are under threat at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I would
And
say like,
so,
as far as like, the labor process and social reproduction, like, one of the things that I heard, I forget where I heard it from. I don't know if it was C. Derek Barn or if it was Conrad or like somewhere. But like, the problem that like, the only thing that AI can't do is replace a lot of these factories where shoes and like sneakers and clothes are made because the fact it's like it's not as fast or precise to do the stitching, so you still require labor. But in a sense, it's like, we see AI and it's like elementary form being able to like create self-checkout at Walmart. Now, of course, even with that, we still need people to operate on the maintenance and even to survey that, which is the ironic part. But like, yeah, I don't know when it comes to like fractal value. I mean, I've never heard that before until today. So, I mean, maybe it is also indicative of like what is being privileged with that fractal value if it's not celebrities and just the bourgeois, again, just to bring it back to the simplest Marxist terms, like not that it wouldn't affect us working class or the poor or the lumpen or whatever, but like it seems like it's privileging the spectacle of like the fact that everybody, the ruling class, like those that worked hard are enjoying, and you can too one day.
Yeah.
I think it's helpful, this fractal form of value or viral value, if we talk like that. It's also helpful to frame it as the value of the attention economy, attention value.
Yeah.
I think, like for me, I've been thinking about value for years at this point, like trying to come up with something. And I think one thing for me is looking at kind of Bataille's general economy and looking at capital as a machine, not to produce value for us and for our sake and from our perspective, but just to manage surplus. And so to actually, like what capital actually does is it produces waste. We think, like from our perspective, the ideology that we all kind of have no choice but to onboard, or else you'd fucking kill yourself, is that it produces use value and its utility and stuff. But what's really happening is it's the solar anus. It's taking in solar energy. Plants are eating it. Animals are eating plants. We're eating animals. We're producing machines. Machines are producing the commodity. The commodity is just symbolic exchange in reverse. It's nothing but it's produced for exchange. It's this churn. It's death by attrition, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like all we're doing is producing waste. We're producing commodity objects that are built to be replaced. They're not built to be used. And you can read Benjamin and you can talk about the aura of originality and like I don't know. It's just it becomes crazy. It starts to become this oppressive feeling of like, fuck, man. Like the machines are winning the war right now, and we're still all out here like fucking, I don't know, trying to impress each other with dumb bullshit on the internet. And we're dying, dude. I mean, and we're all always already dying. That's what makes life worth living. But like we're losing the war.
We're dying in a different sense.
Yeah. We get to choose. Like when you get to live a fulfilling life, you're choosing your death. You're choosing your own most. But
That's the way it gets. What the drive wants is to choose its, choose the way it dies.
that's taking up responsibility. There's a lot there. I don't want to be all bummed out though, dude. Like there was something else that came up when we were talking about old people and nurture. And I didn't actually write down what I was thinking. I just wrote down old people nurture. But I kind of want to return to that. Like senescence, like old age, and death. And like we send our old people off. A lot of the time when we send them off, it's because we just have to work. We don't have the time to do the shadow work to take care of them. It's like babies. We send babies to daycare or public school because we have to work. We have to be productive. We don't have the time required to do the labor of rearing or caring for the old. But it's also like a disavowal of death. Like old people homes are sad places. Hospices are sad places. And like capital and the ideology, and part of this ideology of capital makes useful things is it's just an affirmation of life. And old people, they're sad and kind of gross. Not to be a dick, but it's sad.
Yeah, when I was working at a healthcare facility, it's just like, you got like a bunch of like old people coming into the kitchen. They're like, can I have this and that? It's like, bro, what's your diet? I can't give you that. You're diabetic and you want a fucking PB&J and a Yoplait yogurt. Like, I know, like, and they're just like screaming at me and cursing at me. I hate you, yada, yada, yada. Meanwhile, those nurses aren't doing their job. And you got like an old man in a wheelchair and their piss bag is exposed. It's like, come on, man. Like, it's not their fault. It's just like, the way that the infrastructure and the bureaucratization of it and like, and maybe it puts into question even like the amount of, again, capitalism and the problem of the medical industry as well. Not even just in therapy, but even just like in medicalization. Like my dad was just telling me that he might have to get surgery on his knee, but also that he has the ability to take that new thing that he could do for like any sort of like joint injury, where they could take
stem cells,
the bone marrow from your hip bone, and then inject it into your joint, and it's a speedy recovery. But it costs like over like $3,800. Out of that's just
and it's not payment. Covered. Yeah,
that's just a down payment, right? And so it's like that's just like one example. Imagine being old and then having to get that surgery, right? And your healthcare doesn't cover it, and so like your healthcare is like, okay, we can put you in this like cheap ass healthcare facility in the fucking ghetto, right?
Yeah. and then like the old people to get taken advantage of and shit too. Like it's also very unfortunate and very sad because they do get taken advantage of. I think Netflix made a movie about that a few years ago. And it kind of blew up and everybody suddenly became conscious of it for like 6 months and then everyone forgot about it again. But like earlier, Tut came up and like the family and like, I don't know. I kind of think like this is a structural problem. Like we're not out here trying to talk about individuals and try to blame anything on anybody. I can't stand people who always stay there. Now it is appropriate to call people out on their bullshit, but we also need to be having like structural conversations and like just the old people thing, and the structure of the family. Like it used to be the case that your old people were in your home. And your old people, not only did you deal with them and you had to put up with all this stuff and all that, but they were also like productive members of the family. They reinforced the kind of ego ideal. Like we were talking earlier about there's no difference between the poser and the authentic. Like there is no more ego ideal for us to live up to. Like we are just in this kind of postmodern Jackson Pollock painting of like everything is. This is what it is. And the image, the appearance is the essence of the thing itself. And like having old people in the home and having families, I think has a lot to do, or not having any of that stuff has a lot to do with kind of how young people are now growing up, and they're not connected to any narrative. They're not connected to any thing outside themselves. Like they really are growing up in this structural solipsism where it's just like you are the thing and you have to participate in this kind of imagistic world, and there is no difference, there is no negation.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's why like Tut's project is always ongoing. He's always talking about it. But I think his main point, which he's getting from not only just Marx and Engels, but Christopher Lasch, is that like family is not only the like as an institution, not only like the nucleus for the reproduction of social labor and just social reproduction in general, it's also the site for antagonism and also trauma as well, not in the psychoanalytic sense, but it's the first thing to get attacked whenever there's something wrong politically and economically. You know, in the also affects the problem of social mobility, where like now, you know, homes are either broken, families are fractured, or you have to like live with a bunch of people just because you can't meet ends meet with like traditional nuclear family. You know, if anything, it's only like those that are in the ruling class that are able to enjoy that life, but still divorce rates are high. But if you're a child within like a bourgeois, petty bourgeois family that's going through a divorce, sure, you may have some like, you know, psychic wounds, but you never have to worry about the financial instability with that. Whereas if you're living in the poverty line, if you live in the hood and that's happening, like you got to deal with so much the economic fragility, constantly going to court, the way that the legality force is sort of impinged upon you as well, being, you know, sort of thrown into institutions, and to where like, you know, the lack of initiation and edipalization makes you as an individual within a broken home, within a broken family, project and cling towards the market and the institutions for that type of symbolic initiation, you know, as well. This is something that Lash and Tut talk about in different ways, but the fact is like, you know, there is, because capitalism is fractalizes everything. Like there's that need for you know, some type of like surrogate bond or surrogate initiation. That's why, for like as Tut, I don't want to speak like put words in his mouth. From what I understand, he's like saying like, listen, it's not a matter of like we need to return to the nuclear family, like the conservatives or like, you know, even Lash sometimes romanticize, but it's neither abolish the family, because if you abolish the family, then you forget about the social reproduction within the mode of production surrounding it, you know, and that's what needs to be put into question.
All right. What's happening, everybody? That's it. That's the end of the episode. It's not the end of the conversation, but it's the end of the episode. It's later on the East Coast for Nick and Andrew, so we were keeping them up late. So we went ahead and let him go. But it's an ongoing conversation. I can't wait till we can reconvene and continue this conversation. You know, I don't think this topic is capable of being exhausted. But there's also a lot of other stuff that I like to talk about with these guys as well. So looking forward to the next time we all get together and have a conversation. Who knows what channel it'll be on. Like I said, I'll put everybody's info down below in case you're not already following or subscribed, and you should be. But yeah, it was a great conversation. It kind of ended right there. Like I said, it's later for them than it is for us, so we were kind of keeping them up. Didn't want to do that. But yeah, it was great. Looking forward to the next one. Appreciate them coming on. Appreciate you guys coming on, having the conversation with me. Appreciate you guys for being in the audience and listening along or viewing along. It was a great conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and eat some food. I'm going to go eat a burrito and do something other than sit here at my computer and waste away. So thanks, guys. We'll see you.